Hi everyone, welcome back to the Sports Breakdown once again. So today we are going to discuss about the Sri Lankan women's squad ahead of the ICC 2020 World Cup 2023, which is going to happen tomorrow. It's going to start tomorrow. So for that, we've got in Estelle Vasudevan, who's our guest today, and she knows a lot about Sri Lankan women's cricket. Plus, she works as analyst for the Papare Plus, and also she is a co-host for Sri Lanka at the 99.94 DM, which is where I mostly follow Sri Lanka cricket nowadays. But how are you, Estelle? And how excited are you for the Women's World Cup, which is starting tomorrow?
Thanks for having me, Pawan. Yeah, really excited. I think this tournament's going to be one of the best we've seen for a long time.
So let's talk about the Sri Lankan women's team squad first of all. So we know Chamari Atthapathu is captaining right now the Sri Lankan women's team squad, and also we know that also we Harshita Madhavi, Oshadi Ranasinghe, Inoka Ranavira. How do you see the chances for the Sri Lankan squad for the 2020 World Cup, which starts tomorrow? Because we saw yesterday, I think Ireland women's upset the Australian women's team yesterday, and then we saw Sri Lanka women's team narrowly beating Ireland women's team in a warm-up match before losing to the West Indies women's in a close match. But with this squad, do you see Sri Lankan women's team having a chance of upsetting one of the greats? Because we have Bangladesh women's, South Africa women's, New Zealand and Australia in all one group. So how do you see us having a chance? I mean, Sri Lankan women's team having a chance?
Yeah, first of all, I think if you look at the two groups, you can say that Sri Lanka has gotten into maybe the tougher group of the two.
Yeah.
They've got three teams in that group which could realistically challenge for the title, or at least to get to the final. So New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. Australia, of course, the top team in the world, one of the most dominant sides overall over the last decade or so. So it's going to be challenging. Uh, but like you said, just looking at the warm up fixtures, I think Sri Lanka will take a lot of confidence from the fact that Ireland beat Australia.
Mm.
Just to kind of, sometimes with the Australian team, there is very much that aura of, no one's getting past them. They're the best in the world. They're not going to be beaten. But even if it was a warm up, and I think you have to qualify that by saying that in a warm up game, the way a team like Australia approaches a warm up game versus how Sri Lanka or a team like Ireland would approach it is different. A higher ranked team will look to experiment a lot more as opposed to teams like Sri Lanka and Ireland who will look to play their best 11, look to, get those 11 players as much game time as possible. So there is that kind of qualifier there when we talk about Ireland beating Australia. But still, even with that,
Mm.
with the strength that Australia has in their bench, it's still a significant achievement, I think, from Ireland. So just looking at that, you could say that Sri Lanka did really well. I think at that point in the warm-up game, at one point, it did look like Ireland would cruise through to a win. But the bowlers, once again, which is Sri Lanka's main strength, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Managed to pull things back. But more importantly, I feel like more than Sri Lanka beating Ireland in the past, we've never lost an international to Ireland, so you would expect them to be beaten, right? But
Yeah.
also that whole aura of, Australia can be beaten.
Mm.
You need certain things to go in your way, but they can
Yes.
be beaten. So I think that'll give them a lot of confidence going in, like I said, because it's a tough group and they're going to have to pull off an upset or two if they want to make it through to the semifinals.
True about that, yeah. But talking, we know that obviously the bowling is the main strength for Sri Lanka. But when it comes to the batting, I think the batting is the main issue. But the thing is that Chamari Atthapathu hasn't much stepped up. I think in the past year it has been mainly Harshita Madhavi, and I mean a small cameo from Kavisha Dilhari, or even the middle order Nilakshi De Silva at times scores runs. So maybe it could be a beneficial, like the other Sri Lankan women's batters are stepping up, but you would want to see the main player. I mean, Chamari Atthapathu is obviously the best Sri Lankan women's cricketer ever produced, I would feel. So how do you see like Chamari's form is like could be a worry, but do you think that she could step up in the 2020 World Cup coming up?
Yeah, look, obviously it's a concern. She hasn't had, the type of performances that you would associate with her in the more recent past.
Yeah.
Didn't do much in the Asia Cup either, despite Sri Lanka kind of getting into the final. So it is a cause of concern. But at the same time, I think if you just look at past tournaments, you do see that Atthapathu has kind of almost saved her best for the best teams. She's made a lot of runs against Australia, does enjoy the ball coming onto the bat. I think in the first warm up game, we saw a little bit of that form where she was able to go over the top with that extra pace, extra bounce in the wickets. So I would 100% back her. Obviously, I don't think there's ever going to be a conversation about leaving her out,
Yes,
uh,
that's for sure.
because as long as she's fit, she's going to feature for Sri Lanka. There's no doubt about that. Uh, and I think she will be quietly confident that she can get some runs. If she can get just a couple of boundaries, just a small innings where she's middling the ball, I think she'll be back in the game.
Very true about that. Yeah, I think the bowling, I think as we spoke, has massive improvements, and I think especially the experience of Oshadi Ranasinghe and Inoka Ranavira, both of them wing spinners, and then I think the fast bowling lineup also has done a decent job. So, your thoughts about the bowling attack of Sri Lanka so far? Because I think they did really well yesterday against the West Indies women's team as well. So how do you think the bowling attack will actually help Sri Lanka to go forward, or perhaps try to upset one of the strong teams, maybe the South Africa or even New Zealand women's team? Because I don't think Australia women's team might be realistic, but we have a chance. But still, to be either upset either one of those two teams, I think the bowling is a must for them to obviously restrict them to a low score. So how do you think the bowling attack has been for Sri Lanka women's in the past year?
Yeah, you rightly said, like, it's the experience, right? Karanavira, Oshadi Ranasinghe have been playing for a long, long time. What's important, I think, in the last post-pandemic, after Sri Lanka had that massive break from international cricket, they've had regular series and they've had regular domestic competitions as well.
Yeah.
Not perfect, but they've had more regular competitions in Sri Lanka. Obviously, things can be better. So that experience that they bring into the side is going to be crucial, I think. And I spoke about this on the Sri Lanka on 99.94 podcast as well, where we previewed the tournament.
Yeah.
uh, our lazy assumption is that all pitches in South Africa are going to be bouncy and are going to be quick.
Yes.
But just looking at maybe the SA T20 and maybe speaking to some journalists over there, that might not be the case. You might have tracks that are a little bit slower and might favor Sri Lanka a little bit more because they will rely on their spinners, right?
True.
I don't think they will play anybody beyond Achini Kulusurya in terms of fast bowling option. Ama Kanchana will be in there probably as the all-rounder who does bowl a bit of medium pace. But
Yeah.
Achini Kulusurya is going to be the one quick bowler in the side. Apart from that, it's all going to be spin. It's going to be Kavisha, Oshadi Ranasinghe, Inoka Ranavira, like we spoke about. You've got Chamari herself who can bowl some off spin. So it's going to the game plan is going to center a lot around the spinners.
Yeah.
So if we are able to get surfaces like that, I think it'll be hugely beneficial. But at the same time, you have to understand that no matter how good your bowling attack is, and I think Sri Lanka's bowling attack has been one of the most economical over the last couple of years.
Yes. True.
If you're not putting enough runs on the board, you're not going to win any games, right? If you're putting on 110, or like we saw in the second warm-up game, 107, it's
Yeah.
going to that defending that is going to be very, very tough. It's not going to happen in every game. So bowlers are great. It's a very strong bowling attack.
Yeah.
But the batters are going to have to get those runs. If not, it's going to be a real struggle for Sri Lanka.
Also, Estelle, your thoughts about Vishmi Gunaratne, because I think recently, I think against the Indian tour also last year, I think she did really well on her debut. She's still, I think, 16 years, and she was the captain for the Under-19 World Cup as well, and I think she did quite okay. But your thoughts about her, because she's a real talent. Perhaps a lot of people are saying she could be the next player who could replace Chamari Atthapathu and be a shining star for the Sri Lankan women's team with the way that she's performing. So your thoughts about Vishmi Gunaratne? I mean, she's 16. She's in the 2020 World Cup squad. What can we expect from her, especially her opening with Chamari, perhaps, or her batting at number 3? Because I think usually Harshita Madhavi and Chamari opens, but her playing at number 3, what kind of role do you think that Vishmi Gunaratne will bring to this Sri Lankan women's team?
Yeah, I mean, she's obviously a very talented player, right? Broke into the scene with a century in domestic cricket against Chamari Atthapathu's side. So she's got a lot of talent. That's obvious. Captain the under 19 side as well at the age of 17, I think now.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of chat surrounding her. I think what ideally will happen in this tournament is that she will be able to show some of the experience she gained during that under 19 World Cup in the senior tournament, because remember, unlike the others, she spent the last month in South Africa. She's got a few good knocks in, has a measure of the surfaces to some degree. So she's going to be, I think, one of the most important cogs in that batting lineup, particularly because if you look at in the past, Sri Lanka's biggest problem has been scoring at a decent run rate, right?
Yeah.
Very often you see a Sri Lankan team kind of struggling to even get to 120 in a T20, which at this day and age is not really a good enough total, right? So players like Vishmi Gunaratne and Harshita, who has, I think, worked on her game really well during the last couple of years, they are very important to Sri Lanka's cause, because they kind of take the pressure a little bit away from Atthapathu. Atthapathu, for the longest time, has carried the weight of the entire team in terms of batting, right?
Agree.
And in maybe 6 months ago, if Atthapathu doesn't get runs, Sri Lanka are going to crash and burn. But that's not the case anymore, I think, particularly because of those two young players. So Vishmi's role at number 3, and I'm very interested to note that they have pushed her down to number 3 instead of using her as an opener. Even in the under 19 World Cup, she played in the middle order. So it's very interesting to see what type of things she'll try to do. In my opinion, Atthapathu will be the one who goes hard. Samara Vikrama and Gunaratne, I think, will try to bat around her, try to bat as long as they can, because we haven't really seen much from many of the other batters to kind of inspire much confidence.
I agree with that. Yeah. And another talking point I want to talk about is the strike rate. Especially, I know Chamari's strike rate is better. I mean, around 90 or 100. But the other batsmen, I think, perhaps because in the middle order, especially, we see the Nilakshi De Silva or even Kavisha Dilhari at times, their strike rates are really low. And that's why when Atthapathu and Harshita give a good start, the middle order is always sort of, I mean, the strike rate always depends. I mean, it affects in a 2020 match, obviously. And to get that 130 or 140, you need a strike rate around 120 or 130, which the middle order lacks a bit. So, how do you see now? I mean, the Sri Lankan, especially the middle order, how can they improve? I mean, obviously, they need to have a power striker, perhaps, or something, but how do you see the Sri Lankan women, especially the middle order, improving on the strike rate? Because this is very crucial in case if Chamari, Harshita, and Vishmi Gunaratne get out early. I mean, it will depend on the middle order, and usually the middle order, they struggle to get going. It takes them a few balls, so they take a lot of dot balls for them to get going and score runs. So, and you cannot afford that in a 2020 match, unlike in a ODI match. So, how do you see like the areas where the middle order can improve a bit, especially on the strike rate? Because we can, I mean, the Sri Lankan women, if they give a good start, they can obviously go and get a 140 or 150. And we know that bowling attack of other opponents are really good. So, but how do you see that sort of improving over time?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to say what will happen in the tournament, because obviously it's tough to make big changes.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems Sri Lanka has, and I think has had in the past, and the game's kind of moved on since then,
Yes.
since they could kind of hide that sort of innings, is that not many of them can get going from the word go, right? Actually, when I say not many, I think apart from Atthapathu, there's nobody in that side. Even Samara Vikrama or Gunaratne at this stage aren't able to kind of go at 120 from ball 1, right? And that's a big issue for Sri Lanka, because it almost, what happens is, even if they do get a good start, but if the openers eat up like 12 overs, again you have like a 4 over spell where batters are trying to get in. That is a massive problem for Sri Lanka. I think in terms of improving, uh, Nilaksha De Silva's game has kind of moved ahead of that. She is a lot more dependable and does score a lot faster now than what we saw in maybe the last 3 years. But I think you can learn a lot from someone like Harshita. Harshita is not a big hitter. And if you look at the Sri Lankan side, I think apart from Amaka Anchana, maybe Nilakshi, not many of them can clear the boundary comfortably, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so what Harshita did, I think, during that period where Sri Lanka was not playing international cricket, is that she worked a lot on finding the gaps. She doesn't clear the boundary. She's not clearing the inner circle, right? But
True.
she's able to find the gaps on the offside, and that way kind of maximizing her game. Uh, Similarly, like, if you're not a power hitter, you're not a power hitter, right? It's tough to develop at the age of 30,
Mm,
which some of those players are.
true.
So then you have to move to what is your strength and kind of maximizing that, which I feel hasn't really happened. And maybe it is the fact that they don't play often enough like the men, where they do get to face a quality opposition very often, and they're
True.
able to work on those things. They do spend a lot of time in training, in matchups, in nets, right? which
Yes.
which isn't the same as playing a game. um so that is, I think, one area where they can improve. But I think Sri Lanka cricket as a whole, if you look at this team, is not going to be able to be competitive unless they develop, they unearth someone who can score as quickly as someone like Atthapathu.
Very true, yeah. And seeing the fixtures, the Sri Lankan women's team also has, they have 2 games at Cape Town tomorrow against South Africa women's. I think South Africa women's just recently beat India women's as well in the tri-series and won the tri-series. So how tough will it be for the Sri Lankan women's to actually beat this South African team? I mean, especially they don't have Dane van Niekerk, so that's a huge plus for the Sri Lankan women's right now, because otherwise Dane and Nikak is usually the best batsman that they have, along with Lizelle Lee, but both of them are not available. I think Lizelle Lee retired last year due to fitness, but do you see a chance that this Sri Lankan women's team have a go at South Africa women's? I know it's in their home conditions, especially in Cape Town. They have the first 2 matches, I believe, at Cape Town before they move to PAL. So your thoughts, do you see Sri Lankan women having a chance, I mean, a realistic chance of beating beating South Africa women's mainly, because I think there is a slight chance for them to actually beat South Africa women's if they do well, if they have a good game and if they have a good day, they have a chance of beating South Africa women's.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no better time to play South Africa than now. I think
Mm.
you mentioned rightly, Lizelle, Dani Van Niekerk not in the side. Van Niekerk's omission obviously caused a lot of, there was a lot of conversation surrounding it. Should she have been left out? She's the captain. It's a home
Yes.
World Cup. All of those things. So obviously there'll be some feeling within the camp about it, right? It's unavoidable. But at the same time, as you mentioned again, they've performed well in the last couple of months. They've beaten India. They had a decent warm-up run as well. So they're not a team to be taken lightly. But I do think that Sri Lanka's best chance of beating South Africa is in that first game, where both teams are kind of, all the pressure is on South Africa. They're the hosts, right? And I think to a great degree, there will be a thought of, proving themselves, or you know, saying that, look, making that statement that, look, we lost Lizelle Lee, we lost Van Niekerk, Mignon Dupree retired
Yeah.
also a few months ago. So that's 3 key players who they're without. Uh, but surely the newer ones, the players who are taking their places, will also want to prove themselves. So they're not a team to be taken lightly, but all the pressure is going to be on them. And if you look at Sri Lanka, no one's expecting them to do anything. I don't think anybody apart from Sri Lankans would be surprised even if they lost to Bangladesh. So there's nothing riding on them. So they have everything to gain, I think, in those games against the top teams. cause an upset, and suddenly, you've got a chance of even making it through to the semifinals.
Yeah, very true. I think all teams, I think in the group phase, really tough, including the Bangladesh women's have recently rise. So I think it's a bit of a worry for the Sri Lankan women's, because I think they haven't played much matches also in the build up to the 2020 World Cup. Also, I think they rarely play series. Also, they recently played against Pakistan, and they don't get much opportunities to play. But especially, I think they're going to play in Cape Town, PAL. I think. In Quebreta. So you see, I mean, especially the conditions, I mean, obviously it will depend on the day, obviously on the playing 11 that they choose. But as you said about also, maybe certain pitches could be slow as well, and perhaps they will consider one fast bowler. But when it comes to the fast bowling, you also mentioned about Achini Kulasekara also. So do you see any other fast bowlers? I think Sugandhika also perhaps will play play a major part also, because especially in South African pitches, most of them have bounce, but we've seen in the SA20 also certain pitches also give some slowness. So what do you think about apart from Achini, do you think Sugandhika also can play a big role? Especially we saw in Asia Cup also, I think Sugandhika did a bit, she did quite okay. I mean, especially in Asian conditions, the Sri Lankan team fairly does well in their bowling lineup. But especially when it comes to fast bowling, how big of a role will Sugandhika Kumari play in this 2020 World Cup?
Yes, Sugandhika Kumari is actually left arm spinner. So she does take the new ball with Achini Kulasuri, and he is entrusted with kind of the death overs as well.
Mm.
She's another, really important cog in that bowling attack. So you've basically, I think Oshadi Ranasinghe, Sugandhika Kumari, and Inoka Ranavira have their roles kind of nailed down. And then you've got Atthapathu, Kavisha Dilhari, who kind of fill the gaps along with Achini Kulasurya. In terms of fast bowling stocks, apart from that, I think, like I mentioned before, Ama Kanchana will probably play more of an all-rounder, can clear the boundary if she does get in, and can bowl a couple of overs here and there. Another another prospect in the squad is Tarika Sewandi. She's a left-arm quick. Kind of in the mold of Udeshika Prabodhini, the veteran who has not made the trip to South Africa this time around, but she is a bit quicker. I think the only thing kind of keeping Tarika out of the team is the fact that she can be a bit wavered, which to me, I mean, you can't really, it's very difficult to judge because they don't play a lot of cricket. So it's only natural that when you do get an opportunity, or you kind of come off as trying too hard. So she has been a bit wavered. She did have a decent warm-up game against the West Indies, I think. Didn't go for too many runs. So that will probably be a really good confidence booster for her. But I think those are realistically the only fast bowling options Sri Lanka have.
I think even Malsha can bowl, but I think she bowls both spin and fast bowling as well. So at times, if we need
Malsha is the other one who can kind of give you a spin bowling option in the middle. But apart from that, it's very difficult to see Sri Lanka playing more than one quick bowler in Kulasurya. Amakanchana will likely play, but I'm not really, I wouldn't bank on Tarika getting a go unless Achini Kulasuri is injured.
Very true. So as we're going to wrap up, Estelle, what do you think about the chances of Sri Lankan women's team in this 2020 World Cup? I mean, they face South Africa, Bangladesh, New Zealand, and Australia. As we said, do you think they have a chance of getting at least to third in the table? It's very difficult, obviously, to make it to the semifinals, but do you see at least we can get a win or a two in this 2020 World Cup? At least try to get at least to third. I don't know if they can make. It's going to be very difficult for them to get to the semifinals, like 1 or 2%. Even though they played well in the Asia Cup, they've reached the finals. This is a totally different experience, and plus they are not playing at Asian conditions. They're going to play in South Africa in the Sena conditions, so it's not going to be easy. But do you see them getting at least 1 or 2 wins in this 2020 World Cup realistically, and end up in a better position that than they were expected to finish in this women's 2020 World Cup?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to call. Like you said, the conditions obviously aren't going to be as familiar to Sri Lanka as, playing in Asian conditions. But I think they'll be disappointed if they come away with no wins. They'll want to get the better of Bangladesh, who they have kind of really done well against in the recent past. It's a strange thing. Bangladesh has gone on to beat India several times, but they somehow seem to struggle against Sri Lanka. So that'll be one team they'll definitely have their eye on. Apart from that, like I said, look, they have nothing to lose. No one's expecting anything from them. And I think that they should use to their strength.
Mm.
Go out there, just try to execute your basics as well as possible. I mean, one thing that Sri Lanka always seems to have a problem with is their fielding. They've
Yeah.
lost a ton of games with drop thanks to dropped catches. So I think if those little things, if they can fix, an upset against one of those three teams is not far away. I think they can do it. They just need to have a really good game, maybe a perfect game against South Africa or New Zealand or Australia to get the win. But again, no pressure on them. All the pressure is on Australia. Everyone's expecting them to win. So they've got pressure on them. South Africa has got host nation pressure and historically have not been good in pressure situations. New Zealand may be the team without much expectation, like Sri Lanka. So, you know, just they have to go out there and give their best. I'm sure if they have kind of a near perfect game, they should be able to upset one of those teams.
Very true, yeah. Another prediction is still like who's going to be the best performer, do you think, for Sri Lanka? Seeing on recent results and seeing how they performed in the warm-ups as well, who do you think will be like the rising star for Sri Lanka in this Women's 2020 World Cup?
I don't know if I can say rising star because she's obviously been around for a while. I think this is going to be a break. This could be a breakout tournament for Harshita Madhavi. Has kind of been there and thereabouts.
Yeah.
But I think, like I said, she's worked on her game so much during the last 3 years. This is the time for her to really perform.
Yeah. And bowling wise, I think obviously I think Oshadi Ranasinghe and Inoka Ranavir, I think both of them are very experienced. So hopefully they do contribute for the women's 2020 World Cup. I think they did very well against West Indies yesterday. Unfortunately, not enough runs, or else I think Sri Lanka women's team would have beaten West Indies women's yesterday. So yeah, so I think that's it, Estelle. So thank you so much once again for joining the sports breakdown. So I'll upload it on YouTube as well in a few hours. So thank you so much, Estelle, for previewing the Sri Lankan women's team, and hopefully Sri Lankan women's team do well, and hopefully they get at least a win or a two and come home. I mean, obviously we are not having high expectations, but hopefully they can get at least a win or a two.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Pawan.
Yeah, so please do subscribe to Sports Breakdown, and please do check out Estelle on 99.94 DM as well, and do listen to their podcast and their YouTube, I mean the 99.94 YouTube channel as well, along with Mark, who's a friend of mine from the Murali end also. So do check them both out as they discuss about Sri Lanka. I mean, daily, I think you guys do 3 videos a week or like 1 video a week?
We try to do 3 videos a week. It all depends on what's going on.
All right, no worries. Yeah, but do check them out on 99.94, and yeah, do check out. I mean, Estelle is obviously a popular figure at the Papare, and always also discusses mainly about cricket, and also do check out as well. So thank you so much, guys, and see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much.